there were many alternatives. One such alternative would have been the more common word pei. I suggest that self-respecters, through the choice of Buddham, are drawing our attention to an important theoretical distinction between Buddham and other supernatural forces. For example, while pei would retain its association with undesirable features such as jadi for self-respecters from the 1920s onwards, the Buddham would be prefigured. So, in 1926, before the publication of the Samadharma ancient Brahmanism appears as the Buddham which caused the forming of the Brahmin-non-Brahmin party in this age, and plain and simple Brahmanism, as a Buddham, was the reason for Tamilians born as brothers beating each other and disputing in courts. Yet after the publication of the Samadharma Manifesto in 1931, the Buddham is reimagined as the ally of the non-Brahmin. For example, in 1934, a poem titled Laborer's Rouse, Toyolara Yorichi, by Comrade, runs, quote, "A crore of legs marching as one Buddham Sara, labor's angry form Sara, look at it seeking, rising, shaking the world's four directions as the one body which we sought, the journey, the heart, as the one vision sparking flames, leaping, bounding ahead, rising forward, look at it striding along. From the burning, smoking, melting factories, narrow lanes, dark caves and holes, the laborer Buddham sets out, and immediately the chains weaken and shatter. 4,000 continuous years of ancient cuffs turned to dust, buried in the earth. Comrades, listen, Samadharma is in the world." This poem, like the translation of the Communist Manifesto itself, uses the Buddham to blend industrial labor exploitation with the factory, with what we presume to be the exploitation of caste, religion, and the supernatural, the 4,000 continuous years of ancient cuffs. And this blend of caste and class is importantly not described as happening in India, but rather the world. The explicit use of the Buddham over other more common supernatural forces, such as the pei, encourages us to explore the distinctiveness of the Buddham, a distinctiveness fleshed out over the nearly 2,000-year-old Tamil classical literary tradition. Though space does not permit an extensive literary analysis here, what follows are a few examples of what I take to be the decisive features of the Buddham, namely, first, a category-defying liminality, coupled with a second, a ravenous appetite associated with protection and justice. The earliest appearance of the Buddham occurs alongside the pei in the Poongundranaar. After a detailed description of war which parallels the sequence of battle with that of agriculture, where drums are thunder, arrows are rain, chariots are plows, etc., the poem concludes, quote, and this is George Hart's translation, "And the terrible new crop with handsome heads bending low is the many towering stacks of corpses with female pei crowding around them. Demons and herds of foxes stretch the field while Buddham take up their guard posts." Pei and Buddham would occur frequently together, such as later in the Devaram, quote, "Wandering for alms with Brahma's severed pale head, while joining the Buddham along with the pei who have come to the forest, those with eyes like a deer are pleased as they watch as he dances with fire. Oh wonder, he is one of Siyanalur of vast groves filled with honey." End quote. The two passages quoted above represent just a few of many references which, I suggest, situate the pei and the Buddham in liminal spaces, on a battlefield that becomes an agricultural field where corpses become crops, and in the forest that marks the border between civilization and its absence. Elsewhere, Buddham and pei's liminality is indicated not only by their place in the world, but also by their place in grammar. For example, Mayale Nadar's commentary of the Nanul features both pei and Buddham as grammatically resistant exceptions to rules dealing with first, second, and third person nouns, writing, quote, "Isn't it the case that the non-rational, that is the akranai, are appropriate for first person, that is I, without rationality, that is without virtanai, that if a pei, Buddham, monkey, parrot, and dove speak, then first person is common to them? Yes. The Buddham and the pei are both creatures that can speak, and thus refer to themselves in the first person, they're rational, I, virtanai, but which are referred to in the third person, the irrational, akranai, or it. By the 19th century, Arumukham Navalar's commentary on the Nanul focuses simply on the Buddham to illustrate grammatical defiance. The commentator claims that some nouns are marked by masculinity or femininity, singularity or plurality, but that does not necessarily tell you whether or not they are rational, virtanai, I nouns, or non-rational, akranai, it nouns, beings. This summary is followed by a few pages of examples which feature the Buddham, but not the pei, as the archetypal example of that which can be both rational and non-rational, virtanai and akranai. For example, the two category or tinai first-person noun, he writes, common to the third of these I first-person nouns, yan nambi, yan nangai, yan budum, is the tu tinai, that is the akranai and wirtanai, singular. Above, we have seen that liminality is a characteristic of the budum both in the world, on battlefield and forests, and the word, grammatical exception. The characteristic of the budum which distinguishes it from the pe, I would suggest, is an appetite for flesh coupled with protective power. As we saw in the Poongundranaar, it is the budum who take up positions as guards, whereas the pe merely feast on the dead. Let us turn briefly to some examples from Tamil literature to see just how such appetite is associated with justice and protection. In what follows, I focus on the first Tamil epic, the Silapatagaram. The story provides a variety of examples where appetite and protection, eating and justice, are joined in the budum. The budum's first appearance here is as a protective force among sacrifices of rice with suet, flowers, and wine. Quote, remove the suffering of the king of the victorious spear, said the king of the gods, and upon this command went the protecting budum. This protective power, here associated with the sacrifice of ingestible items including alcohol and flesh, is later more explicitly associated with appetite. And here I'm going to do my best budum voice. Their hands I will bind with a rope and beat and devour those who behave unnaturally under the subterfuge of penance, unfaithful women who hide their evil, lascivious ministers who covet others' wives, false witnesses and slanderers. Thus spoke in a rough voice, loud enough to be heard for 4 leagues, the budum of the crossroads. This verse links ingestion with justice. The budum devours the wicked. The budum's spatial liminality, his home at the crossroads, is coupled with its voice, which we saw earlier in grammatical commentaries, blurring the distinction between rational first-person nouns, wirtanai, and non-rational third-person nouns, akranai. The budum's capacity to devour is once again associated with protection or justice. The protective voraciousness of the budum is repeated later in a section titled The Story of Refuge. The following poem praises the hero Covelin in a story about the budum. Quote, there was a woman, a faithful wife, who was defamed. To the husband of this woman, the man who was base gave false testimony, so he, the husband, would not know. The devouring budum captured in a snare he who really had the fault. Seeing the grief felt by the mother of he who was caught, it happened that you went to break the bound snare, saying, take my life, release his life. The tall budum gave a good counter, saying, nowhere is it natural to forfeit bliss by taking a good life for the life of one. Bound for hell, perish your thought, and his life was devoured in front of you. Again, the budum is that force which brings about justice, assuring that evildoers are punished to be eaten by the budum. In the interest of time, I will not continue through with examples drawn from Cubbon's 14th century Tamil translation of the Ramayana. The point is simply this. The budum was an intentional way of imagining the revolutionary program of Samadharma, mobilizing a figure familiar to an audience in order to achieve that imagination. For thousands of years, in addition to its association with liminality, its ability to cross borders and defy categorization, the budum was consistently associated with a terrifying ingestive power, a hungering linked with protection and justice. The coupling of liminality in world and word with this appetite linked to protection gave the budum a valence very different from that of the more popular but markedly vampiric pe. One of the budum's earliest appearances on the battlefield, in which corpses became crops around the 2nd century with the Poongundranaar, had continued uninterrupted throughout Tamil literature when self-respecters reimagined that budum in 1931 as a specter of communism. To conclude, I have presented a central tension in the non-Brahmin political thought of Periyar's self-respect movement. The demand for self-respect, a demand for the elimination of madam and jadi, was positioned alongside a demand for samadharma, a demand for equality predicated upon the existence of madam